Great, thank you so much. This is such a pleasure to be part of this group today. I am Susan Barocas, and I'm a chef, a teacher, and a writer. And I came to cooking about when I was 5 or 6 years old. And I'm really a home cook turned into a professional. And one of the things I so love about food and about what we're doing here today is I'm finding all kinds of connections, which is what food does for us. So for instance, Brother Andrew, love almond cookies. I have not added cloves before. I will do that. Um, I love cloves also, and this recipe today has cloves. And I'm doing a vegetarian dish also, which Chef Kumar uses chickpeas. So, which I'm with you on that. Chickpeas are such a great source of protein and nutrition and fiber. And interesting, Samila, my family went from Spain during the Inquisition to the Ottoman Empire. So my grandfather was from a town called Çorlu that you might know. And my grandmother from another part of the Ottoman Empire. So there's all kinds of connections. Today, we are cooking a dish that dates back to probably the beginning of modern times. Well, I should say it dates back probably to around the 1st or 2nd century of the Common Era. And it is a dish made with chickpeas, garbanzos in Spanish, and combines a sweet and savory. So I'm going to talk as I finish cutting up this onion. And I think Chef Kumar showed us the way that he was cutting it, which is the way I'm going to cut my last piece of onion also, which is a few slices down the middle, and then cutting it into basically strips that are still connected. And it creates a really quick and easy way to dice your onion. And also it actually encourages kind of even pieces, which is something, you know, that a lot of us try to get in our dishes. Now I've been heating up my pan with 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and we're just going to get our onions. It's funny how many of these dishes start with cooked onions. One of the best things in the world. All right, so there's all the onions. There's quite a few in here. Onions are a very interesting ingredient in Jewish food because they were used by the Jews in Spain, and during the times. Well, stepping back. There was a lot of sharing of cuisines between the Muslims and the Jews from the beginning of when the Muslims came to the Iberian Peninsula. Not so much with the Christian community, but the Jews and the Muslims had all kinds of things they shared in common. Chickpeas, almonds, using things like onions and leeks in the cooking. And by the way, one of the things I always do when I'm cooking onions to help dry out the moisture is I always salt it a little bit. Okay. And we're just going to let these cook a bit while we kind of talk about the idea of how food travels, because this is a dish I could imagine my ancestors ate in Spain 600, 700, 800 years ago. And food connects us so beautifully to whatever our ancestry is, and it helps us get to know other people. In Judaism, in Hebrew, there's a term hesed. Hesed means loving kindness. And I always like to think about cooking with loving kindness, with that love coming through our hands onto our food. And I think it makes the food taste better. I think you can taste the difference when you cook with love. So, all right, these are starting to cook away. Now, this uses an interesting combination of sweet and savory. Sweet is from honey, which was a very common sweetener since the ancient world. We know that there was collection of bee honey from usually holes in caves up high. There's some cave paintings in Southern Europe that show this funny little picture of kind of a straight wall, like which is the cave or the cliff. And there's a rickety little stick figure ladder and two stick figure people. One of the stick figure people is up on the ladder with this great big bag over across his body. Clearly he was collecting. And there's another stick figure at the bottom not really doing anything. In the picture is also ginormous bees, which is so funny because it was actually dangerous to collect honey back in those days. There was not, a whole lot of protection, and you were disturbing the hives and stealing their honeycombs. So it's very interesting to think about how we got the ingredients that we got way back all the way through today. And by the way, a lot of in the Bible, when we talk about honey, it very often is referencing date honey or date syrup, which is called Ceylon. And so there's both of those kinds in Jewish cooking and in Israeli cooking. So while this, let's see. So the other thing is that we're going to be using pomegranate in here, which adds a little bit of that tartness, both pomegranate juice and pomegranates themselves. Pomegranates were one of the foods that were found when the Israelites were wandering in the desert, and after 40 years came to the land of Israel and they sent out spies to see what does this land have. Well, they came back and there's talk about the 7 original species that were already growing in the land of Israel. And pomegranates are one of them, and they're very important. And so many cultures and religions have used the pomegranate in their religious art. It's absolutely fascinating if you look it up. It's very interesting that this fruit became a symbol for so many. And in Judaism, we have a saying that the pomegranate has 613 seeds. Why 613? Because that's how many mitzvot, or it's translated as good deeds, but it's really more like doing good rather than just good deeds. But it's how many you're supposed to do every day. And I can tell you that I have counted pomegranate seeds for fun. I know it's a little weird, but I have done that. And I also used to do it. My son loved to do that when he was young. We've never found 613. As a matter of fact, interestingly, we really got over 500. So I love the symbolism of it, not necessarily what really happened. All right, so these are softening, these onions, and they're getting translucent. So what I want to do now is just add some grated fresh ginger. It's about a half a teaspoon. If you love ginger, add more. If you don't like ginger, add less, or if you want, leave it out. But I urge you to try it because it does really add just a little subtle flavoring to this dish. It's not pronounced. The same with the cloves. This is a very little bit of cloves. It's only a quarter teaspoon of ground cloves. And it just is going to add, again, some really lovely subtle flavoring. And that's what you want to do often with dishes, is you don't want them to smack you in the face necessarily every dish. Sometimes you just want this subtle kind of like, ooh, what do I taste in there? So, and I can tell you right now that cooking these, the ginger and the cloves is already starting to open up, and the smell is becoming really delicious in here. Okay. And just want to stir that up, kind of coat the onions a bit with everything. And you're just doing this for about a minute. Now we're going to add the honey, the pomegranate juice. Add the pomegranate juice first so that the onions won't burn. This is a cup of pomegranate juice. And you can find pomegranate juice all over, including, I'm happy to say, 100% pure pomegranate juice, no sugar, which is what you want, at Trader Joe's. So it's pretty easy to get. All right, so while this gets happy together, I want to show you a trick with honey and with pomegranate syrup, which we're going to be using. So we're using a tablespoon of honey. And you can do this with measuring cups. You can do it with your measuring spoon. You want to get a little oil onto your measuring tool. So in this case, you can either dip like this, just kind of coat it a bit with some oil. Not a lot, it's not going to affect your recipe one bit. And we are adding, okay, a tablespoon of honey. And this is beautiful Greek honey a friend of mine just gave me from, she's from Volos in Greece. And I'm so excited. It's got some wildflowers and thyme, and it's got a beautiful flavor. So this is a great dish for this time of year for Jews because the Jewish New Year is coming up. And as part of cooking, of course, has to do with symbolic connections. So this is, having honey in the dish is symbolic. We cook with honey a lot at the New Year in order to promote a sweet New Year. Okay. The other way that you can do this, and you saw the honey just slipped right off the spoon. I should have stopped and showed you. All right, and we're doing 2 teaspoons of pomegranate molasses. The other way to do this is just a little spray. And you want to do back and front if you're dipping. Okay, and this is, again, pomegranate molasses is what you get when you boil down pomegranate juice. And here, let me just show you. It's this thick, beautiful, syrupy. It tastes great in salad dressings and in all kinds of sauces and dishes, including this one. So we're adding our 2 teaspoons. Let's see if I can show you. It's sliding right off already. That's 1. You can see it's just dropping right in. There you go. And we're going to add 1 more. Okay. And this spoon is mostly clean, which is so amazing, right? Because a lot of times you leave half of your, thick syrupy ingredient gets left on the measuring implement. Okay, let's stir that in. And an interesting ingredient we're going to add, and this is the kind of encourages the sweet and sourness, is we're adding a half a teaspoon of wine vinegar. Now, wine vinegar was used very commonly in the Iberian Peninsula for many, many years, and all over the world, in fact, because you got it from leaving red wine sit and turn into vinegar. And so that was a very early cooking ingredient and very useful. Okay, we're almost there. This is almost a done dish already. So this is, a really lovely dish. I don't eat meat, so for me, having things like chickpeas is very satisfying. They have a nice bite to them. And by the way, I should mention, Chef Kumar talked about canned and made from dried chickpeas. I did make these from dry. I do like the taste more. I very often use canned, so no guilt there. But I had the time to make these, and they really don't take very long. You just soak them in water with a little baking soda for, an overnight or during the day, and cook them up in about, I think it's cooked in about 35, 40 minutes. Because you don't want them to be squishy. What you want is it's kind of al dente, like you do with pasta. So there's a little bite to them. There's a little firmness, but it's definitely cooked. You just don't want them to get squishy. All right. So we are going to add the chickpeas now. This has had a minute to kind of simmer a bit. So we're going to add the chickpeas, this is about 3 cups. It's a very easy recipe to make for a crowd. And I'm going to stir that in. Oh, the smell, it really does. I know everyone's kitchens who's been cooking smells so good. And this does too. It's really lovely. All right. And then we have salt and pepper that we do want to add. Okay. So, it's about salt and pepper, I think, is very personal. Because these are chickpeas that weren't canned, they don't have salt on them. whenever you're using canned chickpeas, even if you rinse them, you should check your salt, not necessarily as much as the recipe calls for. When I use canned chickpeas, I don't rinse them. And I also save the aquafaba, the water from them, to put in soups and all kinds of things. It's a good thickening agent. You can use it in some recipes in the place of eggs. Anyway, back to this recipe. I did, because if you cook with the canned chickpeas, then you don't have to rinse them. The salt that's on them plays into your recipe. Just taste before you salt. So these actually, I'm going to taste a little because I did add salt to the onions. Not quite, but it is. You can tell that there's some salt already in this recipe. So I don't know that I'm going to add the full half teaspoon. I think this is about a big pinch and a little pinch, maybe about a quarter teaspoon. And this, I'm going to add about a quarter teaspoon of pepper. This recipe, actually, if you really love pepper, it tastes fabulous. And you can even add, if you want, spicy pepper. And I'm going in my cabinet to show you Aleppo pepper. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but it's a gorgeous, gorgeous spice to use. Aleppo pepper has kind of it has flavor with it. It's not just hot. When I use cayenne so often, I find it's just heat. And this actually adds a little flavor. And I'm going to sprinkle it on at the end. All right, so this is all stirred up together. And it just needs to simmer a little bit more to blend, but it's really tasting pretty good. I mean, that's the dish. It's pretty easy. By the way, if anyone has questions, this is a good time to call them out. No? Okay. I guess not. So, all right. So everything's in that we need except the pomegranate seed. So we want to add, this usually would simmer about 10 minutes. You know, we'd leave it simmer, blending, and I think it's probably simmered for 5 so far. But because we're on a schedule, we want to be careful not to go over. Maybe I'll talk, you know, I already seeded the pomegranate, but I want to tell you about a trick while we're standing here. There's a wonderful trick for seeding a pomegranate that I always use. It's spanking the pomegranate. I don't know how many of you know this trick. If you were to take and cut a pomegranate around the circumference, okay? Then you hold a half in your hand and you kind of raise it up a little bit. And you take and go all around and bang on all the edges, and the seed, the arrows just drop out. Very little white will come out. There'll be a little white membrane. So you want to do these in a separate bowl and take out what little bits of white come also. But it's just such an easy way to do it. In 5 minutes, you can do the whole pomegranate, boom, done, all the seeds out. Don't bang on the top of it. It will not release the seeds. You've got to go around all the edges. And really, like, it's not tapping. It's like, you know, you got to give it it's a good way to get rid of some frustration or extra energy. Okay. Now this is, again, one more taste because I think you got to taste as you go. What's so lovely about this dish is that you aren't sure exactly what ingredients are in there because everything blends together and none of them stands out so much. So here's our final ingredient, which is the seeds of a pomegranate with the juice that came out with it, because that'll just add to the dish also. And we're just going to let this heat up. One of the things that's so lovely about this dish is you can make it ahead a day or two. It keeps really well in the refrigerator. And you can serve it hot, cold, room temperature. It lasts for hours at room temperature if you're ever back to entertaining and having a buffet. It's a great buffet dish. And the other thing, it goes very beautifully with, pairs with other foods really well. So it's great with rice or other grains for a main course or a side. It's a great vegetarian main course. And maybe served with some sauteed chard Swiss chard, which is also a food that was used widely in the Iberian Peninsula for hundreds of years. That's a nice accompaniment to this. And it also pairs well with chicken and fish dishes because it doesn't overwhelm any of them, but it adds lovely flavor. All right, we are going to plate pretty quickly here. And okay, so plating is a big deal, as Chef Kumar mentioned, and I think some the other chefs too, because we all know we eat with our eyes first. So what I want to do is, let me get a spoon here. I want to plate this, so that I like having it, I don't like it in a deep bowl. A lot of the dishes that you find that are from Middle Eastern or Mediterranean culture, the Spanish culture, a lot of the dishes get served in like low, shallow bowls or rimmed platters. So this has some juice, and so we do want a little edge, but not a deep bowl. Okay. And I just love the color of the pomegranates in this. They just kind of like little gems. But then I think I'm a pomegranate addict. I absolutely love them. And at this time of year, we're just going into the season, so get your pomegranates. They last through usually around February here in DC. They start in September. All right. And I don't want to leave any of this good stuff in the pan. This is my favorite and most useful cooking utensil, and you can tell it's very dark and been used for several years. I love it. It's very convenient and good on any kind of pan, including nonstick. All right. So we kind of like to mound it just a little bit, just a little. And then I have some chopped fresh parsley. Now, if you were going to not serve this today, you could put this in a container. Once it cools, put it in a container in the refrigerator. And don't add the parsley yet. So you want to do that right before you're going to serve it. I'm going to do it so I can show you how beautiful it looks. All right. And again, washing your herbs is very important. And I will say, I have become, you can see how I chop parsley now and cilantro. I use the small stems. And this is something in like many cuisines around the world, especially Persians, use the small stems because the stems have so much vitamin. They have so much of the really healthy nutritional content is in the stems. So I encourage you, you know, in a dish like this, if you're chopping small, which I did, here's a piece. So no one's going to get hung up on that being in their food. You just have to watch it. You can't chop big and use stems. All right, so there we are. This is the chickpea dish dating back to, who knows, you know, dating back a very long time to the Jews and Muslims in Spain. And I love that they shared their cuisines. And that also, by the way, in Turkey, that was a very big thing in the Ottoman Empire. When the Jews fled, and many, about 120,000, they think, went to the Ottoman Empire to find safety after the Inquisition, they started sharing their cuisine with the Ottomans, and the Ottomans started to share theirs with the Jews, and there's this wonderful blending. And then you have like New World ingredients that came, such as the tomato, which first landed in Europe, in Spain, from the conquistadors. So, and then it traveled, and that was in the 1520s. At some point, it came to Spain from Latin America. So there we are. Thank you all so much. I think at 4 o'clock we have a panel where you can hear more from all of us chefs, and I think probably ask some questions. I really appreciate all of you being here today, and it's been my pleasure to cook with you. Thank you.